Manuel Mateo Goyet, welcome to Digital Markets Research Hub. It's a great honor to welcome you to this venue. You are among the architects of the European digital industrial policy in the area of cloud. So you are responsible for the area of cloud through the prism of European Commission. My first question is to highlight the importance of cloud as sector for digital markets and digital society, and also maybe reflect upon the main initiatives the European Union is taking currently.
Good morning, Oles. A true pleasure and honor to have this discussion with you this morning. Listen, I mean, in short, I'll tell you what I think everybody knows and perceives. Cloud is by now not another tech or another tech gadget or a fashion. It's really become a key fundamental brick. The analogy that my commissioner used very recently is that without cloud and data center, your mobile phone is like on permanent airplane mode. I very much stand by this, and it's not only your mobile phone, it's your smart TV, it's your online accounts, it's your tax declaration, it's your health records. Computing is pervasive, and if cloud computing is the computer that you use without being yours, it's fair to say that besides the laptop and mobile phone I've got right in front of me, I'm using thousands of computers every day without even realizing this. And this is the cloud. So it's really pervasive and a fundamental brick of our economic growth. What is the situation today in the market? It's a complicated situation because, and I'm sure we'll discuss this down the road, the interdependency throughout the value chain is pervasive. But today, in short, non-European players, and mostly Americans, have got a huge market share in Europe. Depending how you measure it, you land somewhere in between 70 and 85%, with a few other non-Europeans, but very few, and then a leftover of about 15% of European players. That's, if you want, on that segment, but I look as well with my team at the data center segment, so what is just a bit upstream of cloud. And there it's clear that we don't have this capacity in Europe. We are short of our own needs, which means we rely on physical infrastructure, which is beyond the EU. And it is way smaller per GDP than what it is in the US. So it points to two problems. We don't have enough capacity, and we don't have enough champions in Europe.
Building champions is an existential question. For many, it's still coming from competition policy. It's kind of toxic question, but for most, it is matter of survival and future growth and evolution. Essentially, without champions in digital markets, it's probably too naive. Or let me ask you as a question: do you think that we should somehow use our current preferences to small and medium-sized companies, open sources, and somehow integrate federated way of building our cloud infrastructure of thousand atomistic cloud providers using the same API, and that would solve the problem? Or we actually need these private superpowers competing with themselves, being ruthless essentially, and aggressively defending their markets and also expanding beyond?
It's an excellent question, and given the situation and today in the cloud market in Europe for European players, I think we need to try several things and not put all our eggs in the same basket. Federating smaller actors in Europe, why not? That's a solid chance. Some of our European actors are increasingly becoming bigger inside of the single market, but as well extending overseas and hunting and chasing new market opportunities beyond the union. I think one thing you did not mention, but which is fundamental to me, is we need to make better use of the public sector strength and use it as a leverage to develop a cloud sector in Europe, to increase trust that, of course, the public sector, but as a consequence, the business sector can gain from seeing the public sector embracing those technologies, and showing how it can be done. Because what we see is that the market altogether, there's a lot of lack of trust, and if we can overcome that barrier, the figures of uptake today of a business which is painfully growing at 2-3% growth per year. We're currently, at 45-48% of European companies using cloud services, and this is way below what we pretended it to be. So it requires several attempts through different directions.
And you use infer maybe indirectly to the mechanism of public procurement, or the public authorities, central European and national member states authorities, even municipal authorities, have to be more probably responsive to the situation and design their tenders in a way allowing greater chance to European cloud service providers to win the tender, which is actually the case in most other jurisdictions when delicate or critical areas of infrastructure concern. Is it as easy to do as it sounds, as a kind of suggestion?
Well, I mean, public procurement is a key tool, but let's not believe naively that Europe works in isolation. We have trade and WTO commitments, and public procurement is an excellent tool, but cannot be used recklessly. So it needs to be well thought. I think the premise is that there's plenty of signs that this is a positive way of looking at the question. The first one is that historically in the US, there's at least a couple of champions that have emerged thanks to the uptake by the public sector of their technologies. Oracle was born in the early 80s from a CIA contract. It was a startup, literally a two-man company, and started like this. Amazon did the same in the middle of the 2000s. So there is a case to be built that early investment, not through grants, but through procurement into nascent technologies, can be a tool to seed the champions of tomorrow. The other thing is that I think public authorities can be patient. When I speak to private actors, they're looking at getting the technology today. They want to sign and get it today. But the public authority, without being a poor procurer, can be a little bit more patient and buy innovation and buy something. Maybe the tool is not readily available today, but give me a year and I will develop it to you. So you don't buy the product, but you buy a pipeline of developments. And that's what can fuel things. And then there's a tiny segment of the market where it's really about building autonomy and resilience, where public order, public security is involved, and where you need particular tools that are particularly immune to any outside interference, where indeed you can reserve a tiny portion for your European players, but it doesn't come out of a competitiveness and subsidizing background. It comes from a protection of public order to begin with. You cannot have your electoral systems being running the risk of being interfered with. You cannot have your law and enforcement, justice enforcement, customs enforcement. All those things cannot leave any doubt to their continuity.
And yet we often, more and more often hear that even this space is being very effectively sorted or arranged by non-European AI provider who is super sophisticated with finding non-trivial solutions in public administration. My question is slightly different, so please welcome, reflect if necessary. I wanted to ask you, you here being at the center of the kind of these discussions, different, concurrent, complementary views about do's and don'ts in this sector, how to speed up, how to make it more mature, etc. These solutions are mutually supportive, mutually exclusive. There probably must be ultimately a moment when the decision is being made centralized and not much discussion continued, but we have to start making our hands dirty and start somehow implementing a chosen trajectory rather than just saying that sounds interesting, that sounds like more or less attractive. Is it this kind of a need for us to choose one way and go, or different flowers have to flourish and then we will rely on the invisible hand eventually?
Who doesn't like a field of flowers? Listen, I think it's, as always, it's a bit of both. As a case in point, I'm sure you followed that earlier this year, the Commission took the cloud spending of all European institutions, or the forward-looking cloud spending, aggregated it across institutions and launched a call for tender for cloud sovereign services or sovereign cloud services, and awarded 180 million framework contract to such type of services. And I think it awarded it to 4 different consortia. So it's not about putting everything. So it's not a single flower. In this case, it's 4 of them, each providing a different blend of technologies and qualities. So it ensures that subsequently, when being used, there's still competition. It ensures that all the qualifying steps were very demanding. And I think that's one possible way of going forward with public procurement to promote this type of services.
And the next question is examples of the past. I don't know how suitable they are, how much should be somehow factored in and factored out. We have a nice example how the European Union has managed to build kind of industrial behemoth Airbus. Is there anything which we can learn from those who have designed this idea from kind of drawing boards to the factories?
Yes, certainly. And I think the complication, of course, is that it's really looking different on the compute capacity and on the cloud services front. I think on the compute capacity, which is hardware, which is physical, which is capex intensive, you need a new way of funding this type of facilities and of thinking about it. The Commission has, for the last 10 years and even more, but for the last 10 years through EuroHPC, been investing in its own compute infrastructure, meaning not the Commission, but the European Union. So the Commission, together with all the member states, investing in this. This is now morphing into the AI world, into AI factories, and as we speak, into AI gigafactories. This is, if you want, for capacity that the Union owns, but it's clear that the private capacity is as well something we need to look into. And I think Professor Draghi pointed out 2 possible ways, and those are things that the Commission is currently exploring, to set up equity, public equity stakes into private endeavors. And this is complicated because it's a bit the first time it has been done, or it is imagined at this scale, but this is really a promising venue looking forward. In the cloud sector, it's very different because it's less capex intensive. Software can be multiplied very easily. It's more a question of norms and standards and APIs and research and trust. We already discussed what public procurement can do in that area. That's I stick to it that it can be very useful. I think in the past you were asking past experiences that have not worked or where we can find inspiration. We now have the Data Act in Europe, which provides for the disappearance of egress charges and switching costs, the facilitation for standardization and recognition of industrial standards. I think this is a powerful tool which is still barely making its effects. But even before we tried the co-regulatory way for tackling those questions, and it didn't prove that to work that well. And so that was what justified afterwards the Data Act. And fast forward to today, we have put forward 2 weeks ago, the college has put forward 2 weeks ago a proposal for a Cloud and AI Development Act, putting forward a mechanism and conditions under which cloud services need to be structured and criteria they need to fulfill to serve the public sector in general, and in particular the most demanding aspects of the public sector in terms of protection of public order. And we've skipped the co-regulation phase there. The market is, as presumably tried through self-regulatory approaches to do it, but the proof in still today, if you go and search on your favorite browser, if you look for sovereign cloud services, you will have dozens of offerings which are really not aligned and really don't feel the same type of understanding. And this is creating a lot of misunderstanding. It's confusing the clients. It creates a mistrust. And instead of saying, okay, now the Commission will go for a co-regulatory approach in trying to solve these things, we learned from the past that co-regulation is not always a solution, and that regulation can be more powerful in some situations.
That's very interesting, and it would be great to learn more about this initiative and about the ultimate kind of the end goal of this legislative plan. I wanted maybe in passing to reflect upon the observation made by indeed Francesco Bonfiglio, one of the guests, former CEO of Gaia X, another kind of pan-European attempt which was driven by similar maybe ambition in the past, but we are still expecting it to mature. So his observation was, among others, that he see many companies which have two different segment groups within the company. One is doing dry core business in cloud, and another just using lip services to win European grants, talking about green agenda and some open sources and all other popular words which are being somehow exploited, commercialized by companies to win grants, and they don't communicate this to departments of the same company. It's a caricature, an overstatement, etc. And yet there is some kind of essence in this. I intuitively feel. I wanted to ask your opinion. Do you think that we, by expecting the European cloud provider be simultaneously super strong, reliable, seamlessly functioning, and yet at the same time complying with our kind of moral expectations of green, open source, etc., all the kind of values of European DNA, rather than complying, using it as a business model? Is it realistic?
So the question is excellent, but I think it has some underlying pessimistic view, and I'm much more optimistic. I think speaking a lot with cloud service providers and and both the business and the research, I think they see open source certainly not as an obligation, but rather as a solid rock over which to build their services. We were talking a moment ago about industrial standards, and many industrial standards or practices are actually sustained by open source. And even in what you see as licensed commercial products, you see that 80-90% of what is delivered in the back is actually built over open source. So I think open source is certainly not perceived as an impediment. There's no obligation to use it, so it cannot be an impediment. And to the contrary, it's seen as a tool to facilitate interoperability and so on. On the sustainability front, because you brought that up as well, I think so. Here I'm looking more into the data center infrastructure than the cloud service itself. If you look merely at the cloud side of things, without the physical infrastructure, so if you really look at the algorithm, it's obvious, and this is something taught from first year of universities, that the more efficient your algorithm, the faster your client sees the reply, the faster your system goes, the less it clogs, the better it scales. And this is at the heart of every developer's mind. Can progress be done? No doubt. There's some areas, for example, in server utilization rates, where there's a lot of benefits that can still be done. But it's something that is really in the DNA of the algorithm developers. And the latest proof is if you look at the scale of token provision and how much you can do per token in the last, across the recent developments of the models. On the data center front, I think when it comes to sustainability, the discussion logically is different because it's a physical infrastructure. On the pure energy front, the same logic as with the algorithms apply, in the sense that it's the one who pay the hunt to be more energy efficient is in the self-interest of the data center operator. And so a lot of the energy efficiency gains over the last 20 years in data center management is self-driven selfishly by the industry, saying, I want to pay less of electricity bill down the road. This is not to say everything is perfect, but just to say that at least in this narrow area, there's a self-interest, and not everything comes with the stick. The carrot is very strong. And then the rest of the sustainability area, I think there's other elements that are to be looked at. The question of water consumption comes very often. And it's a little bit multifaceted, because a liter of water in Andalusia is not the same as a liter of water in northern Sweden. The local conditions play a lot there. So it's difficult to have a one-size-fits-all, but it's very important to take into account local conditions. There's a question of material or embedded environmental footprint, which is as well very important. My colleagues in DG Environment are now looking into reviewing the WE directive on waste heat. The reuse of waste heat by data center is fundamental, and member states and the Energy Efficiency Directive are looking into that dimension very closely. And there's plenty of very nice outcomes, of small villages being warmed up, commercial centers being warmed up with waste heat. So more is possible, but the technology is there to indeed do more.
And in this conjunction, I wanted maybe to ask you to reflect upon or how important these subjective elements like geographic location of the deployer or of the territory which will be hosting, which intends to host this infrastructure. Because if we zoom out the picture, we can definitely, we've been discussing the power of US giants. There is also emerging rapidly power of other jurisdictions giants, which are less reliant on the rule of law, on the principles of the liberal democracy, and who can rely often on cheaper access to energy. So how, and also access to resources, and obviously with CCTV cameras used everywhere, they can somehow synchronize hardware with software with big data, etc. So should we worry about the rapid growth of non-democratic cloud infrastructure and their expansion? Should we learn something from them with kind of cautiousness? And how do we communicate with them?
So of course communication is key. I think when you look at the European map of deployed capacity, it's clear that we have some hubs of very concentrated capacity. Dublin is, of course, always quoted first, closely followed by Amsterdam, Paris, and Berlin. What you see is that there's several things in terms of mapping Europe, is that there's a competitiveness, natural advantage by the Nordics in terms of cheaper, cleaner electricity, access to water, and so on. There's some geographic competitiveness based on where you are. Portugal is building data centers because you need the data centers at the end point of your connectivity, and there's a lot of cables leaving Portugal to the Atlantic. The same happens in Marseille, where there's plenty of cables going to Africa and the Middle East, and in quite a few other locations in the Med, again following the patterns of cables. And then you have this dimension of latency, which we feel is coming up, and we're nearly there, is that you need to have some proximity to where the computing need is actually needed. You cannot afford in a connected medicine or connected transportation for your signal to go from Athens to Lulea and back. You need some local processing to allow that. And so you need to be mindful of this. And then there's another element, is that data centers, when they're integrated with a cloud service, that we amply talked, but then you have colocation data centers, which are just a facility where you have your local businesses, your banks, your insurers, your any type of company who comes and places their servers to be properly managed by a professional data center operator. And when you look at the map of Europe, there are it's quite straightforward to see that there's some areas in Europe that are not sufficiently covered, neither in edge capacity nor in colocation capacity. And so there's it creates both a huge need, but as well a huge opportunity for Europe to raise its capacity across the continent. And then you brought up the question of non-EU, non-American providers from other states. I think today the market share in Europe is fairly limited. Some have developed for their own needs, so as a vertical integrated need, but in terms of reselling this capacity to the public, it remains fairly limited. The Cloud and AI Development Act, in defining different sovereignty levels, takes those elements into account. and critical entities in Europe, so looking at the private sector, are as well looking into those questions in their risk assessment. And then the cybersecurity acquis, which is currently being reviewed through the Cybersecurity Act number 2, CSA 2, takes those elements into account very much as well. So things still required to be negotiated with the Council and Parliament, but I think we're heading the right way on those questions too.
But again, just as a clarificatory question, stereotypically, as an observer, not being under the duty to be serious, so to say, we look at let's say at China. Out of nowhere, they push the button and they have their own online platforms by using in a couple of years. In a couple of years, out of nowhere, they push the button and they have electric vehicles industry, which already endangers many giants, strong players in Europe. So we understand that it's a blend of different regulatory ingredients. Some of them are not acceptable for the European soil, but do we not implement it? But do we at least follow? Do we know as a regulator to regulator? Do you know and your team how they do it? And you just say, no, it's not for us, or it's somehow beyond your radar and you're focused on the more pragmatic, more kind of real-time issues rather than philosophizing about.
So believe me, we're not spending the day philosophing with my colleagues. I'd like, because they're great minds, but no, we're much more in the action. I think it's a blend of what you're depicting. I mean, of course, on the one hand, our remit is the single market and building it. But we're not naive. We know very much that we live in a world where other regions, China, the US, but others as well, are building their own capacity, their own way. The usual way Brussels has been explaining this is that you have a Chinese model more state-driven with a heavy strong share of state control over companies. You have the American model of companies being rather of an ex post regulation rather than an ex ante, so where you have a bit of an unhindered innovation, but which sometimes leads to excess. And in Europe, we're trying this middle way where we try to have a reasoned development. Now, the levels are numerous, and I can understand that in some areas it might be a bit too much, a bit not enough, and etc. But that's what we're doing instead of philosophing with my colleagues. Yes,
absolutely. And then another naive question: do you have? We understand that the composition of the European Union itself is incomparably more nuanced and delicate and probably fragile than our neighbors on the west and on the east, which are much more homogeneous, and there is no kind of states with their deep culture composing this entity. Playing role. So they are much more monolithic. So there is always delicate communication within the European Union and within the Commission. So I wanted to ask you how fragmented the perspective in the Commission itself is. Do you have maybe not necessarily consensus, but at least the direction in which you function, and not necessarily requiring to explain it to us. Maybe that you are working as a team, each building contributing its own kind of part of their duties to this broader European project, or things are evolving in a kind of spontaneous way, miraculously delivering to the benefits of Europe.
So there's no miracle. There's a lot of hard work. On your main question, I think there's progressively and the movement is accelerating a convergence of views across Europe and across. I mean, the Commission is not my biggest worry, but across the Union as to what has to be done. I think both the vision of President von der Leyen inside of her mission letters, how it's being implemented, and the whole supported by Professor Draghi study is very much converging into the same direction. And of course, all those things are tremendously complicated. So there's plenty of decisions. But I think the main direction of travel and what needs to be achieved is extremely clear to everyone.
That's reassuring. So my last questions before inviting you to provide recommendations to students is to ask you about the second half of 2026. It's going to be hot autumn. Where should we focus our attention? Where should we expect the main news?
Well, listen, I mean, I think what is right now exciting in mid of June 26 is what we adopted 2 weeks ago, the Cloud and AI Development Act. By now, there's already been quite a bit of press releases and first reaction by stakeholders. Summer is around the corner, so we'll start a bit before summer, but after summer and in the autumn, you will see progressively the Parliament and member states progressively taking a position. So I think this will be a very interesting and fascinating topic to follow for students, whether in law, in political science, in European studies. There's plenty of, in economics, plenty of possible angles. As you well know, and this is not my area, so it's colleagues behind the Chinese wall are looking through DMA instruments into the possible designation of cloud service providers as gatekeepers. So I don't know if and when results will come out, but watch this space for if and when it happens. And I think you always have in a political cycle, in the 5 years political cycle of the Commission, you usually have the first year of thinking and drawing plans and announcing work plans. We're now in the middle of the second year where the concrete plans are on the table. The legislative proposals are mostly on the table, and so the coming year is when those are settled then into actual final law. So it's a very exciting moment.
And let me use also this opportunity to thank you for this job, which is not always generating headlines, which is very easy to omit and take for granted because you're doing the things. A last question, Manuel, is recommendation which you could give to students graduating from law degree primarily.
For law degree, I think my message would be first a message of hope. Don't get scared because this sounds too technical. 15, 20, and even 10 years ago, we barely had lawyers in where I work. It was mostly technicians, maybe someone with an economic background. By now, my team is 1/3 technicians, 1/3 lawyers, 1/3 political science, and still a few of economists. And it's what I tell everybody at their recruitment is there's no way any person has the knowledge of everything. So you need to be good in your area, but you need to be curious about others. And so don't be, don't lose hope because you don't understand the details of this and this and that in tech. It's a fascinating world. And what is really fascinating is that in most of our files, we are either balancing different fundamental rights. Should we do a bit more privacy, a bit more right for entrepreneur, a little bit more protecting intellectual property. So we're very often going back to the roots, or because sometimes they accumulate, the question of international relationships, which is very much present in cloud, is there. And so it gives a very multifaceted environment with different challenges. And I would challenge you all as on one point, there are headlines every single day in what I work for, and it makes it even more exciting.
Exactly. Yes, that was my omission. Thank you very much, dear Manuel Mateo, for sharing your ideas with us.
Thanks for welcoming me.